Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Grateful Wife podcast. I am currently 30 miles north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm going to be visiting one of my favorite holy sites today. It's a place called the National Shrine of Mary, Help of Christians, and it is famously known as Holy Hill. If you're ever traveling through Wisconsin, I highly recommend that you stop and visit this beautiful place. It really is quite extraordinary. You can see the towering cathedral for miles away, sitting on top of the hill, and it's just kind of an incredible sight when you see it and you get closer and closer. It's absolutely huge. It's like one of those big cathedrals you'd see in Europe. The architecture, both inside and out, is unlike anything I've seen here in Wisconsin. The views are breathtaking no matter what time of year you come, even though I'm personally partial to fall because I love fall colors. But I would definitely check out Holy Hill, put that on your bucket list if you ever want to travel to Wisconsin. So, why am I going to Holy Hill today? I'm actually going to Holy Hill today to venerate the relics of a very great saint, someone whom I suspect is the reason why I became a Christian and became Catholic. And that great saint is no other than Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus, otherwise known as Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. So this is someone whom I believe I came into contact with 30 years ago when I was just 8 years old. I was visiting another shrine in Wisconsin, the shrine of Our Lady of Champion. And for those of you who don't know about Our Lady of Champion, Our Lady of Champion is the only church-approved Marian apparition site in the United States. It's without doubt one of my favorite places of all time. I go there all the time. But I date my very first experience visiting this shrine was a day when I believe that they also had the relics of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux there. And I don't remember much about that night. I do remember it was nighttime, which was unusual because they don't normally have evening masses. But it was in the evening, and the church was absolutely packed. Me and my dad had to sit in the very last pew of the church. I really did not understand at all what was happening at the time. I really don't have much memory at all, except one thing. I remember the procession of a glass case that was coming down the aisle, and I'll never forget, it was to my right. And I can remember watching this glass case pass me by. And inside this glass case was what looked like to me a small chest. And I later learned that that was Saint Therese's reliquary, and that contained her relics. And so now I don't have proof that that actually was Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, but I really don't know who else it could be because I look at the reliquary today and it's just like I'm right back in the chapel, and it's like I know that's what I saw. And also thinking about it, just as a little history lesson, back when I went there, it was around 1993 because I would have been 8 years old in 1993. The Carmelite sisters, who now reside in Denmark, Wisconsin, they initially were in charge at the shrine there from 1992 to 2002. So, of course, the Carmelite sisters would want to have one of their own, the great Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, to come visit them. So, yeah, that is my first memory of the shrine. And it was also, I believe, my first encounter with Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, that has had a monumental effect on my life from that day forward. So y'all really need to come to Wisconsin on pilgrimage. There are so many amazing holy sites here to see, and I'll try to drop a link to my website and my email address if you ever want tips of other places to visit while you're here in Wisconsin. There's a lot to see here if you're a Catholic or a Christian. Lots of great places to visit. So, going back to that day, I really do believe that somehow in those very few seconds that past when Saint Therese's relics were passing me, that Saint Therese has been interceding for me and guiding me for most of my life. And I just instinctively know this because my life has never been the same after that. And sadly, I have to admit that I really never learned much about Saint Therese after that encounter with her. It's just that I didn't have anyone in my life besides my dad that could have taught me more about her. And my dad at the time, God bless him, was going through a little bit of a phase. He was a devout Catholic at that time, but it was absolutely a phase because he only was devout, like really into it for about 2 years. But that 2 years though was a very pivotal, time for me. It was a very profound time for me. So I'm very grateful to him that he introduced me to the shrine, and unbeknownst to him, he introduced me to one of the greatest saints in modern history. And so the purpose of this is of this episode that I want to go through is showing how Saint Therese has been silently guiding me throughout my life, and how it has made me who I am today, and how I think that we need a return to all of that. We need a return to that in our culture today, not just as individuals, but also as parents, and how we're raising our children, and being more careful and, I would say, particular about what we expose our children to, especially when they're at an impressionable age. So again, like for the majority of my life, from 8 years old on, I really didn't know who Saint Therese was, but she was having an effect on me, and it really just had to do with the fact that I was there. I was there that night, and for whatever reason, she made an imprint on me. And the little that I am learning about her, so the book that I was trying to read last night, I got through one chapter, was The Great Story of a Soul, that was written by her right before she died. I actually find it to be quite an easy read. I think anyone could read it. And I'm finding that just the first chapter alone, wow, I'm learning I have a lot in common with her. So I find that a little interesting as well. But I found, though, that reading the book, we do have a lot in common. And despite all that I've endured in childhood, all the bad influences that I was exposed to with pop culture and music, and there was a lot of it. I exposed myself to all of it because I hated reality. I always wanted to escape reality and be in fantasy. And that's where I lived, in the fantasy world. TV, movies, music, you name it. Books, that was my life. But despite all of that, all that exposure to pop culture, I never really lost touch with God. My love for God was always unwavering. I always had a love for God, but I just didn't know how to go about living my life in the faith. I didn't really have anyone to give me direction besides my dad. And my dad, had to move to Florida when I was 13 to go take care of my dying grandmother. So after he left, I really didn't have anyone in my life that gave me direction. And so I feel like Saint Therese at that time in my life was holding my hand. It was like she was that invisible guardian angel throughout my whole life, holding my hand, always guiding me back to God. And I'm sharing this with you because this is quite literally a revelation that I had last night as I was preparing for this episode. And I'm just excited because this just makes this day all the more sweeter and more meaningful, that now I can go to her today and pray in thanksgiving for all of her guidance and all of her prayers and all of the ways that she has protected me and just ever so subtly showed me her little way to salvation. And it's a way that I'm going to teach my children as well. So I really think that this will tie in well to what I want to talk about today, which is really just the importance of, for us parents, to be raising our children and getting to know the saints. Because I'm just going to say it, as Catholics and as Christians, we should be teaching our children to look to the lives of the saints instead of, people, pop culture stars like athletes, singers, and just the culture in general. Looking at our world today and the culture today, it's just, this tie of success to money, to status, to whether you're famous or, whether you travel around the world or make millions of dollars. The way that people act and dress today, like the more provocative they act, the better. The more provocative they dress, the better. These virtues of modesty and humility are just completely foreign concepts to people today, not just for children, but for adults. I mean, if you ask an adult to define humility or define modesty, they probably couldn't even give you an answer. But these are virtues that I think we as Christians desperately need to try to return to and try to live out if we're going to thrive and survive as a species. And because this podcast for me is primarily aimed at women and young girls, I really think that we need to start focusing our attention more on the great female saints, saints like Saint Thérèse of Lisieux or Saint Catherine of Siena or Saint Joan of Arc. There are just so many great female saints out there that we can help give our young girls, as well as us as mothers and wives, a moral compass to navigate through this increasingly immoral world. And let's face it, if we truly lived the faith, if we really truly believed in what we say, then we would realize that the only thing that matters in this life is that we go to heaven and that our children go to heaven. That's it. It doesn't matter how much money we make. It doesn't matter what we accomplish in our life. It doesn't matter where we travel or what we do. The only accomplishment is sainthood, because sainthood gets us to heaven. And what is the purpose of life unless we get to heaven? I mean, truly. So I look back on my life, again, I'm going to get personal again. I'm going to get real personal. I look back on my life and I think, gosh, I dodged a bullet. I dodged a bullet with all of this pop culture that I exposed myself to because, again, I didn't like reality. I wanted to live in a fantasy world, and that was my fantasy world. And I mistook the fantasy world for real life. My favorite show growing up, my friends will laugh because they can remember how ridiculous I used to act about this show, but my favorite show growing up was Dawson's Creek. It was like a teenage soap opera. And teenage sex was a constant topic of discussion. I dare say the characters were obsessed with it. Not only that, but there was absolutely an agenda back then to try to normalize homosexuality. There was a gay character on the show who struggled in coming out and being accepted in his community. And while of course, I maintain that we should always be loving and try to treat people who suffer from this with dignity and respect, but that doesn't mean that we affirm their sins, and because that's not love, right? And believe me, that is a topic that I absolutely plan to talk about in the future. It's just too big for this particular episode. I'm trying to keep it focused, but I digress. So the show prided itself on having the first gay kiss between two guys ever broadcasted. I remember they were very proud of that fact. And, just thinking back with my experience just with that show alone, I know for a fact that St. Therese was working overtime on my soul and helping me to try to keep my wits about me and not get too caught up in all of this. So then fast forward just a couple of years, comes Kelly Clarkson. Now, for me, my generation, Kelly Clarkson was my Taylor Swift. I thought she was immensely talented, and let's be real, she is. She's an amazing singer. She's incredible. I consider her a legend. But while I still love her music, don't get me wrong, looking back and rereading the lyrics to her songs and seeing her message to young girls like me, the message was keep men at a distance. Don't get attached. All men are dogs and they're all going to break your heart. That was really damaging to young girls, and especially young girls like me, and our views on men and relationships. And, as a young girl, as a product of divorce, Kelly wrote that song because of you. And I related to that song on such a personal level that I thought she was writing about my life. And little did I know that I was far from the, only innocent victim of divorce. It's just that at the time, at that time and where I lived, all of my friends and pretty much everybody at my school, everyone still, their parents were still married. And I, just didn't understand why was I different, and so that really affected me. And this topic is so important that, again, just like the one on homosexuality, I absolutely am going to be tackling this topic again very soon, because it's high time that we stop celebrating divorce, and we should be resisting it at all costs, especially for the sake of children. So fast forward, going through middle school, going through high school, having these sorts of pop cultural influences in my life, it really sort of shaped my viewpoint on love and marriage. And I basically had it stuck in my head that marriage and family was absolutely out of the question. Like, I want to be like Kelly Clarkson. I want to be Miss Independent. Or I want to be like Joey Potter from Dawson's Creek. I want to go to a good school and I want to be successful someday and I want to go to Paris and just live my own life and just be free from men. I didn't want to be just a mom. And I definitely didn't want to risk opening up my heart to someone who was just going to rip it out of my chest. I didn't want to take that risk. And at the age of 18, I had already seen the damage of toxic relationships one too many times, not just in pop culture, but in real life too. But then something very providential happened. And it happened around the time I turned about 20 years old. I met an old woman named Emily. Emily was a woman whom my mom used to clean for and run errands for and just do certain things for. And I got to know Emily really well, and I would often visit her, on my days off, or, bring her flowers just to cheer her up, because Emily was, and at this time, so I was 20 years old, I wasn't going to school, I was working all the time. I basically had no life. I had my friends, but, I had no life. And this was before I met my husband. So I was very much at this point in my life, at 20 years old, very caught up in the commitment of I'm never getting married and I am never having kids. And if I do have kids, maybe I'll adopt. I didn't want to have kids of my own. But I got to know Emily really well. And at this time, she was like 98 years old. She was old. And in her former life, in her early years, she was actually a very successful businesswoman in her day. I would say she absolutely shattered the glass ceiling. I don't remember exactly what it is that she did, but she was high up. And I can remember really looking up to her when I learned about that. And she was married. She was married for a brief time, but her and her husband got a divorce, and that hurt her very badly. And that it burned her. And after that, she decided that she didn't want to get hurt again. And so she never remarried, and she never ended up having any kids. She had a niece who lived in California, and I think she had a nephew who lived in Georgia. But that was it. When it came to company, visiting her on Christmas, on her birthday, things like that, it came down to me and my mom and a couple of her friends. That was it. So, not sure how long, maybe like a year into my friendship with Emily, one day Emily was at home and she fell and broke her hip. And for those of you who are, have grandparents or or know of this. When you break your hip, that's pretty much it. Like, you have to go into a nursing home. You can't live on your own anymore. And so this experience was absolutely devastating for Emily, because she had to get special assistance and go through physical therapy, and she couldn't live in her home anymore. It was just absolutely devastating. And I was with her on her worst day, and I tried to console her, but there was no consoling her, because it was in that moment that Emily realized at 98 years old that she was completely and utterly alone. I watched this strong, independent woman whom I admired bury her face in her hands like this and just sob. And she said these exact words: I'm completely alone. I have nobody. I have no husband. I have no children. I have no family. And as hard as it was to witness this, I thank God I did. Because it was in that moment I woke up. I woke up from the lie that I was living for most of my young life. I realized the cost of abandoning marriage and family. That's something that when you're young, you think that you don't think about being a 98-year-old woman in a nursing home, being by yourself. You don't think about it at all, because why would you think about that? That's depressing. I'm not going to ever think about that until the time comes, and then I'll find a way to deal with it. Well, at that point, it's too late. When you're 98 years old, it's too late. And so, I woke up in that moment, and I'm grateful to God that I was there to experience it, as heartbreaking as it was. So, as you would have it, about a year passes, and then I meet my husband, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, now I want to sort of segue all of this into the other aspect, the other topic that I wanted to discuss in today's episode, and that is the whole epidemic of dating that young people find themselves in today. The great question of, I want to find my soulmate. Why can't I find my person? Where are all the good men at? I really do see how bleak of an outlook this is, especially, if you're a young person. I totally get it. And I definitely do not envy you in the position that you have been placed in. But I really do believe that there is a solution to this if you just hear me out. You may not like the solution. It may go against everything that you stand for at the moment, but I highly encourage you to give it a shot. But first, let me just say that I really think that the return that we are seeing with Gen Z and the millennial generations, the return of people going back to church, I think says a lot about the natural, the natural results, the natural consequences of a world that has been pushing to be, have people be more self-absorbed, to be more selfish. Just put yourself first, think about yourself, work on yourself, this self-care, this just constant mantra of yourself, when in reality, our life is, there is something beyond this existence we have on earth. Okay, we were not meant to live here on this earth just for ourselves. We were actually meant to live for something far greater beyond ourselves. And for us Christians, that's God. That's living for Christ. And that's something that I think is what would explain why we are seeing such a resurgence of Gen Zers coming back to church. They're realizing this world is completely empty. This life is empty if all you're doing is pursuing selfish pleasures, And so I really think that, I've seen this circulating in the news for several months, and I have wanted to talk about it, even though there's been lots of conservative commentators that have already covered this, so I'm very late to the game, but I really don't care because I want to talk about it. It really, I think, serves the mission that the Grateful Wife podcast is trying to serve, which is, helping young people sort of get their priorities straight in life, helping you discover what it is that God was meant for you. I really think that this could be the answer that you're seeking if you find yourself single and alone and looking for purpose and meaning in your life. You got to go to the source of that. You got to go to the source of all love, all purpose, all meaning, and that's God. So let's take a look at this graph. This graph is very telling. You definitely see a significant jump among younger people for all the reasons that I just stated. And then this is of no surprise to me either, is the older generations have fell. In 2018, there were more people in the older generations that were going to church, and now that's fallen. And what could be the reason for that? Like, they're the ones that they've really escaped the dumpster fire that I'd say the younger generation is living in right now when it comes to, just the financial realities of not being able to afford a home and not being able to, pay for groceries and all the necessities of life, stagnant wages. These are all people who very much have enjoyed much better economic times. And studies show, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that when our lives are going well financially, when things are going well for us, we really don't seem to have a need for God in our lives, because look at all that we've been able to achieve in our life. I've bought my house, I've got a great job, things are going well, I go on vacation, I don't need God in my life. And that's where this older generation finds. I would say the middle ones, the 45 to 54 and the 55 to 64-year-olds. But then what is also fascinating to me is looking at the 65 plus. Ever wonder why old people go to church? Why that you see more older people, at least in years past, going to church versus young people? It's because you suddenly realize as you get older and you're approaching the end of your life, you're realizing that all of these things that used to be important to you are no longer important, and you are finally coming face to face with your own mortality. And that is something that as young people, we just don't like to think about. We don't like to think about our mortality. We don't like to think about where we're going to go when we die. And that is something that, as a Catholic, is a beautiful thing, because that's something we are always thinking about, or at least it's something that we should be thinking about. Not obsessively, not being obsessed with our death, but just being mindful of it and being aware that, the choices and the things that we do in our life are going to have an effect on where we go. And, I'm going to cover more of that when I delve more into the Catholic faith in future episodes. But so yeah, this graph here, 65 up, there's an increase as well. It's like people, towards the end of their life, they realize, yeah, I need to put God first. He's obviously the most important thing. And if I want to go to heaven, I better get my priorities straight. So yeah, that graph is fascinating. The other one that is also very fascinating is the amount of men that have returned to the church. Look at the difference with this. The 18 to 24-year-olds, the 25 to 34 vastly outnumber women. So many more men are going to church than women. Why is that? If you think about it, the world that men are living in today, it's all about us ladies these days. It's all about female empowerment. It's all about breaking the glass ceiling, and women need more opportunities for this, and women need more freedom for that. It's, women, women, women. What about the guys? What about the men? Men are being left behind, it seems. They feel like no one cares about them. There's no direction for them. And somehow, thanks be to God, they are realizing that they need to go to the place where they're going to find answers. And that is, that is church, that's God. And so I think this is very promising for us ladies, especially promising for all the single ladies out there, all the single ladies that are asking, where are all the good men at? They're at church. They're at church. That they, I hate to tell you this, but they're not going to the bars much anymore. And ladies, that's a good thing. This is a really good thing. We are seeing men that are trying to be better men. That's what happens when you study the Word of God. You are putting your priorities straight. See, this is actually what we all should be doing in our life. I don't care if you are married. I don't care if you're single. I don't care if you're a widow. We put God first. But that has to be for all of us. We all should be putting God first as our top priority in our life, regardless of what you do for a living, regardless of what your state is in life, whether your life is going good or your life is going bad. God should always be at the top. Because when you put God at the top and you love Him first and you love Him most, it just perfects. He perfects everything else that goes before you. That's exactly what Christ meant when He said, seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. I really, truly believe with all of my heart and soul, I would be willing to bet money on this, that this could solve the current dating crisis that a lot of Gen Zers find themselves in today. I really believe this. Who else believes this? Who else believes this? Tim Pool. Tim Pool from Timcast podcast. Even Tim Pool has this figured out, guys. And he's not even a Christian. And yet he says it on almost every single one of his podcasts. He brings up, I think it's a brilliant analogy, the fishing analogy. He says, ladies, you are fishing in a sewer. When you're going on Tinder or you're going out to the bars and going about trying to date in this manner, you're going to pick up not so great things in a sewer. You're going to pick up sick, disgusting things. Why don't you try fishing in a different pond? And so I think that's brilliant. It's a brilliant analogy. You got to go to the environment that is going to produce the best catch for a man. And ladies, I'm sorry to say it, but it's at a church. So if you really want to find a life partner, if you really want to find someone who is going to be, a gentleman, that's going to have all of those qualities that you're looking for, you really need to give it a shot and go to a church. This is what I meant when I said you need to hear me out. This may be hard for you to hear, but it's worth a shot. If your whole life's happiness could be found in meeting someone in a church, would you not try and give it a try? And you can choose to reject this. You can choose to reject this. That is your right. That is in your power. But again, if you've been at this for a while and you've not seen any positive results from any of your efforts, I highly recommend that you give this a shot. And I know that this might be brand new to a lot of you. Maybe, a lot of you have never once stepped in a church at all. If this is an area that you're not even sure where to begin, then I highly suggest that you give me a call, because I don't know if you know this by now, but besides being a podcaster and being a grateful wife, I also am a certified life coach. I have my own coaching business, Ave Maria Life Coaching. I coach over a whole plethora of topics and of niche areas. And you can visit my website. The website down here is amlifecoaching.com. I have lots of different packages that you can choose from. If you are not ready to commit to a package, then just click on the 30-minute free discovery call. This is where you can get 30 minutes of my undivided attention, and I'll give you some suggestions of things that you could try, and go from there. And if this is a relationship that you want to pursue with me in helping you create more or less a game plan for your life, whether it's your spiritual life, your dating life, either way, I'd love to talk to you. So please book a session with me as soon as this video gets done, okay? So I covered a lot today, and it may seem like it was like going all over the place. I tried to make it like cohesive and, you know, intact. Um, but the takeaway is really about getting our priorities straight in life and not getting caught up in life, whether it's work or pursuing earthly pleasures. Um, we should be always asking God what His will is for us and asking Him to give us the grace to want to do His will. I often tell people when I'm giving, when I'm coaching or giving spiritual direction, that sometimes if that's all that you can do, if that's all that you can muster, is to simply ask God to help you, to give you the grace to want to do His will, He can work with that. He can work with that. And the beautiful thing about that is when you are asking Him to help you to help give you the grace to want to do His will, it's going to help with that internal struggle that you have when it comes to your will and the will of God. That's human nature. It's that internal struggle because let's face it, a majority of us, we just want to do what we want to do. We want to live our life. We want to do what we want to do, and we don't want anyone telling us what to do, period. But as you can see, we have pursued life with this attitude for a long time. And this attitude and this way of life has not produced much happiness, even for those who have resources to pursue their own desires. The people that have the resources to pursue any desire they want, they don't stop. They just keep pursuing. They keep reaching that unattainable bar of happiness that they will never reach. They'll never reach it. So that's true even for people who are very privileged in this life. So I just tell you this as someone who has been on the other side. I know what it's like to be single and alone and living in this world that's just completely surrounded by lies and being resistant to, the authority of the church. Even though I loved God and I loved Jesus, but I didn't want to submit obedience to any kind of authority like the church. But it's absolutely necessary when it comes to your life's happiness because it's a happiness that lasts. So I definitely want to share before I leave with you tonight. I'm kind of running out of time here, but I want to share a page, just a short little passage of what I read last night when I was reading the first chapter of The Story of a Soul. And it'll tie in and wrap up everything that I have talked about today. But it talks about Saint Therese's upbringing by her parents and how they clearly played a pivotal role in why her and two of her other sisters became religious sisters. So I want to share a passage that just really struck me because it applies to, again, not us as individuals, but as parents and what we should be keeping in mind when we raise our children in today's world. Because this book was written in oh my goodness, I couldn't even tell, 1889 or something. And this is how they were raising their children during this time. And I think that this applies more today than ever. And so I'm just going to read this. So it says, Louis and Zelie Martin concerned themselves with three things, and three things only: the church, their family, and their work. Suitable recreation had, of course, its place in their lives, but no time was wasted in chasing so-called pleasures. Nowadays, such a life seems to many far too narrow and circumscribed. Yet a life spent in serving God and performing all the duties of one's state of life is immeasurably fuller, richer, and happier than one passed in worldly activities. That really that really affected me. That really struck me, because that's been the message. That was basically my message of this entire episode. Um, don't pursue worldly pleasures. Don't pursue your own selfish desires. There's no happiness in that. It's absolutely empty, and this return of young people to the church is a testament to that. They have seen that there's nothing lasting in earthly pleasures. And so I would encourage all of you, having finally gotten through this episode, try to be animated for you. But I know that, we got to wrap this up. So again, that message is for the parents out there. We're raising children of a very impressionable age right now. There is so much surrounding them in terms of influence with music, TV shows, movies. We have to really be on our guard when it comes to our children. I think about that little short window that I had in being formed in my faith journey when my dad went through a radical conversion that unfortunately only lasted 2 years, but it was in that little window that I believe this Saint Thérèse, was able to sneak in and take over when my dad couldn't do it anymore. And just having been exposed to that at a young age changed my entire life. And so, parents out there, if you're not bringing your kids to church, if you're not teaching them about Jesus, and you're not teaching them about the 10 Commandments and the lives of the saints, if you're not teaching them that there is a life beyond this life here, there's a life of heaven, or there's a life of hell. We're not getting out of this life alive. So it really matters what we're teaching our kids and what we're exposing our kids to. And so I just encourage you to follow the example of St. Therese's parents. Not necessarily saying that you need to push your kids to become, religious sisters or to become priests, but every vocation is holy. And that's something that, the Catholic Church, we talk about a lot, is vocations. A lot of people associate vocations with either the priesthood or religious life, but marriage is a vocation too. Married life and family life is absolutely a vocation. It is a covenant. It's a sacrament from God, and it's meant to be lived out holy. And if you're not teaching and raising your children in the faith, you're not staying true. You're not being faithful to that covenant you made with God. And so that's kind of the point of this video, the importance of raising children, today in the faith. So yeah, that about does it for this week's episode of The Grateful Wife. I'm absolutely spent, but I hope I was able to keep you guys awake. So I just want to thank you for joining me today, for sticking with me today. If you got anything out of this episode, or if you have it on your heart that you want to have a conversation with me, whether it's a free discovery call, or if there is a particular thing in your life that you want to work on, whether it's, working on your faith, or perhaps you're in a toxic relationship. I will be doing an episode on toxic relationships and how pop culture has sort of played a big hand in that. But I am well versed in the world of narcissistic abuse and recovery. So that if that is a situation you find yourself in, you absolutely need to give me a call and book a session with me. And you can do that right here at amlifecoaching.com. And, just book an appointment, and hopefully we can get started on your healing journey. So I am off now to Holy Hill to see my old friend of 30 years, St. Thérèse. So please know that while I am there praying, that I will be keeping all of you and your prayer intentions as part of my intentions today. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. All right? Have a great week, everyone. God bless.